Here's what our living room looked like before we began working on any improvements, and by the end of this video, you'll know everything it took to completely transform this space. Many people don't know how to turn a large piece of wood into handmade furniture, so here it is. For this project, I'm going to look for large sheets of wood, which is called plywood, 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. So I asked someone at the store to cut it to a smaller size so I can fit it inside. Once I'm able to load it up in that little thing by folding the seats down, letting the wood stick out the back, and ratchet strapping the trunk down so it doesn't swing open, I carefully drive home. And then I get out my own table saw, which if you're like me and don't have a space to work inside, I have to haul my tools outside, so it helps to have things on wheels. So I cut these strips into smaller and more accurate cuts I need to make shelves. The employees at Home Depot and Lowe's are very helpful, but I'm a perfectionist, so if their cuts are even 1/8 of an inch off, it could throw off my entire project, so I don't rely on them making too many cuts for me at the store. And now you can get an idea of how I'm able to handle large pieces of wood completely by myself by making the use of sawhorses on the receiving end of my table saw, which allows me to run these 8-foot long pieces carefully through the blade to get that perfect cut. Then I'm able to turn these large 8-foot long strips and chop them up into specific lengths I need with my miter saw. So I make sure these long pieces are running perfectly perpendicular to my saw blade and carefully make those cuts. And once I have enough of those cut, the most exciting part is building something that can be a part of our home forever, but more on this project soon. Today's mission, we're turning these two sad, empty walls into a huge built-in shelf setup. It's gonna make the room feel way bigger, but the real goal, giving it that cozy grandma vibe y'all are learning to like. Now here's the tricky part. There are 2 doorways connecting the living room to the hallway, and 1 to the kitchen. The problem, they're not the same height. In the kitchen opening, it's ugly. So I need to fix that so one of the shelves I'm about to make can run across the whole room seamlessly. But to cover this ugly opening, I need to cap the top and sides with wood. So that way there's a solid piece and a pretty base to build the shelves off of and connect to. And once that opening is fixed, we're ready to actually start making the built-in shelves. And if you remember from yesterday where I talked about turning plywood into a piece of furniture, this is basically part 2 of the process of what I do to wood before it's transformed into shelves. After all the wood is cut to the sizes I need, first up, I gotta lightly sand down the edges. No one wants splitters, especially my lovely wife when she's admiring the finished product. But also, it makes the surface appear much cleaner and makes it easier to paint. But we're not done yet. The next step is drilling pilot holes, because if you go straight into the wood with screws, it's gonna freak out, crack, split, the whole drama. So a little extra prep keeps everything smooth and sturdy. Once I do all the prep work on the plywood, assembling all these pieces together to turn it into a shelf is super easy. So come back tomorrow and I'll show you what that ends up looking like. My wife said we needed to fit 2 million books in this living room. I said, Gabby, life's too short to be able to read that many books. I want more books, she said. So from then on, I learned to say yes, ma'am, real quick. So the journey of figuring out how we can fit an absurd number of books in this room began. This room has lots of large openings into other rooms and windows on the other side, so maximizing shelf space was a tricky obstacle to overcome. But it wasn't just books she was after. This woman wanted something that would max out the scales of cozy grandma sparkle. She wanted lamps sitting on the shelves, mostly because I told her candles were too dangerous. And not just 1 or 2 lamps, that's a sissy number. She wanted to light this place up like it was an intimate, cozy, candlelit fireplace lounge. This meant having the ability to house as many lamps as possible. So this presented not only the challenge of making sure the lamps fit within the shelves, because most lamps are much taller than books, but lamps typically are plugged into the wall. So I had to make sure I cut holes into the rear corners of each shelf before assembling everything together, so that there was a route provided to fish cords back to the wall outlets. So the more progress we made on this project, the more we could see the vision come together. You can see the varying heights of the shelves to accommodate spaces for smaller books and larger lamps, and the discrete location of holes running through everything so we can plug something in from any spot in this built-in. So if there's ever an issue in this house, it's not a matter of if it can be handled, but how it can be resolved. So stay tuned to see how many books and lamps we end up fitting in this place. And spoiler alert, it sure looks cozy in the end. So we wanted our living room to feel bigger. And what do? We build a wall. I know, sounds weird, but hear me out. We closed off this little space to create a closet, which gave us some much needed extra storage, and boom! Now the living room is way more defined, but this created a prime opportunity for me, which was a massive new wall to mount a much bigger TV. But remember, I'm a married man, so there's one woman who makes the decisions in this house. So I had to approach this situation delicately. So construction of this massive built-in was well underway, and Gabby's dream of fitting her 2 million books into this room was coming true. But I had a different plan. See, building this wall wasn't just about creating boundaries. For me, it was about sneaking in space for a much larger TV so I can watch my cats play. Nope. For some of you that may have come out wrong, I'm not a cat guy. They're cool animals, but anyway, my main goal here, to make room for a 75-inch TV so I can watch my Kansas State football Wildcats play on a proper stage. So to sort of camouflage this big screen that's blasting college football in the background every weekend in the fall and winter, I have it surrounded by bookshelves above and below it, making this space fit perfectly in with the rest of the built-in. And thanks to my genius planning, we now have an oversized TV hidden in plain sight in Gabby's cozy grandma library living room. You think she'll notice? Okay team, we've got a problem with this large built-in we're constructing. These plywood edges are ugly, but don't worry, today we're fixing that with a face frame to cover up those unsightly stripes and give these shelves some class, because looks always matter. Speaking of looks, where is she? I said we're doing this together. Ah, there she is. Thank you, Gabby, for gracing us with your presence. I guess being pretty means not showing up on time, huh? But honestly, I love dragging Gabby into all these projects because I like proving to her that a lot of this is simpler than you'd think. So everything we do here is something you can learn too. I'm talking directly to you, the one watching this video. So maybe this will inspire you to finally tackle that project you've been putting off, but make sure you try something small before jumping into a project this big. So for the face frame, we're keeping it simple. A little liquid nails and some nails from the nailer, and boom, those ugly edges disappear. But now we've got this shelf all the way up to the ceiling. It's looking a little basic, so let's class it up with some crown molding. Crown molding is the secret sauce that makes this project go from, hey, I slapped this together in my garage, to OMG, who's your interior designer? It draws the eye up and gives that built-in a finished high-end look. And we're not stopping there. Let's wrap it around the entire room to tie it all together. And ooh-wee, that's looking real nice. But the bottom needs some love too. You can't just have wood awkwardly meeting the floor, right? That's why we're adding baseboards to give the built-in a polished, seamless connection to the room. It creates this nice anchored look tying everything together. You might think these shelves look great from afar, but up close, well, there's definitely some work to do. Luckily, my filter by order just came in because things are about to get messy. So to fix these little imperfections, I'm using wood filler to cover up all the cracks, screws, and nail holes. Applying it with my putty knife is easy, but the real challenge comes after it dries. That's when the mess starts. I need to sand everything smooth because if I don't, it could actually make my problem even worse. Now, usually I'd take my sanding business and make my mess outside, but since it's a built-in, that's not really an option. So I tried to cover up openings into the rest of my house with plastic, but that dust storm is inevitable. And once I'm done sanding, if I don't change my air filter in time, it could cause some serious respiratory issues. That's something you definitely want to take seriously, especially in the world of woodworking. So keeping the air clean is just as important as making sure your craftsmanship looks great. Actually, it's probably more important. So before your house filter gets clogged, head over to FilterBuy. With fast and free shipping, they offer long-lasting filters in almost any size, perfect for protecting your home from dust, allergens, and pet dander. I'm constructing a large built-in bookshelf for my wife in our living room because remember, she wanted 2 million books to fit in here. And as I'm installing the last of the baseboards, I realized I put something off for too long. So remember, I was able to sneak in a spot for our large TV into the plans, but every TV needs some quality sound. Gabby said, we don't need that, it won't make a difference. I said, oh yeah, you want to bet? But there's an issue. Our subwoofer is bigger than our shelf cubby I made here, so what do? Cut into a wall, duh. It's okay, I put up the wall myself, so I'm not worried about the whole house falling down. And yep, that wall didn't need studs anyway. So once I get that cleaned up, the problem is solved, and now we can paint this thing. But we don't settle for good in this house, so what would a professional do before painting? That is applying a paintable caulk in all the corners, because attention to details like this can make anyone's craftsmanship improve from B- to A+. Then I tried taping off the areas we don't want paint touching, which I seem to struggle with. Does anyone have tips for that? And then once that's done, we're ready to paint. And our sweet little baby Kennedy watching. And it may look underwhelming now, but to truly integrate this in with the rest of the room, we're painting the built-in, baseboards, crown molding, and walls on the other side of the room all the same color. We're gonna let Gabby's books provide all the colorful language in this room. And I always make sure I pull that tape off before it dries with the paint. And honestly, this is the most realistic part of the video. Half our time is just moving shit around so we have room to work and clean. And we're not done yet, but bam, here's our couch, and we moved most of our junk into the kitchen for you to catch a sneak peek for now. We got the built-in installed, now we need to add some doors. We want to hide all our junk in here, and making these doors is a lot easier than you think. So we wanted some cabinet doors under the TV, so I started with pieces of plywood, and the first step is to create holes for the hinges to go into, but I need specific sized holes that a regular drill can't create. So I grabbed a jig made just for this, and I've used it dozens of times now. But I didn't want them to look like cheap store-bought ones, and plywood isn't the best material to create fancy details with, but I wanted to give these doors a little extra character. So I used a router to carve out a nice detail, but here's the problem. When you cut into plywood, you expose these rough layers underneath, and that's ugly. So I had to fill in those gaps and then sand it all smooth before painting to match with the rest of the built-in for this living room. And once that was done, the hinges went on and the doors were ready to install.
We like to reduce, reuse, recycle here. So these are actually leftovers from our kitchen cabinets. And we're broke, so we couldn't buy new hinges. Wow.
The doors are on, but now we run into another problem. These doors are super uneven, but you can actually adjust it by tightening or loosening some of these screws in here. We are coming down the home stretch on this series, and while we're focused on the space under the TV where cords and random gadgets tend to pile up, definitely not the most organized setup. So I figured it was time to tackle this spot by adding some shelves to clean things up and give it a polished look. First, I started by cutting down some plywood. I used a table saw to rip down the pieces vertically, and then the miter saw for those cross cuts. And because I want the attachment points to be hidden, I drilled pocket holes on the underside of each shelf. This way the screws will stay completely out of sight, making for a cleaner finish when they're installed. And one thing I wanted to avoid was having that raw plywood edge showing at the front of each shelf. So I added edge banding, which is essentially attaching a thin strip of wood along the exposed edges to give it a more finished look. Once the banding was on, I sanded everything smooth and applied a clear protective finish to bring out the natural beauty of the wood, but it also helps the wood last longer. So once these shelves had a couple of days to cure from that process, that's when the fun part came. And to make sure everything stayed level, I cut a couple of temporary support blocks that would hold the shelves in place while we screwed them into the cabinets. And with everything lined up, the shelves fit perfectly, and it already made a huge difference in tidying up this area. And if you've kept up with all these updates on our living room built-in, you'll be happy to hear that tomorrow I am finally sharing the end result of how everything looks with all the books and lamps set up. Making my wife's dreams come true by filling these shelves with millions of books and cozy lamps. But Gabby wants a lamp plugged in up here. There's an outlet down there. No one wants to see the cord. So the plan was to drill holes through the shelves to help hide the cords a little bit. And my dumb butt can't make it fit. And guess what? I made that mistake everywhere. So let's fix it. This should be big enough. Drilling a bigger hole in a pre-existing hole is pretty difficult, so I have a template here to help keep my drill steady. Look at that. Oh, wait for it. Moral of the story is we all make mistakes. Most of them are fixable, and that's okay. But it wasn't just the books that are going to make this the coziest living room you've ever seen. We've collected all sorts of special items throughout the years that help make our home feel extra special to us, and it made all our hard work pay off. And if you think it looks good now, wait till you see it at night. And Merry Christmas to all of you.